The Maymore Mound is an Indian burial mound located just south of Point Pleasant along the Ohio River. It sits on the Woods family cattle farm and is visible from Route 2. It is the third largest burial mound in the state and was built by the Adena people between 500 BC and 1 AD. The Adena culture existed during the early woodland period and built several mounds in Ohio and West Virginia. In the mounds, people were buried with many possessions to take into the afterlife. A mound that is similar to Maymore Mound in height and construction is located in Chillicothe, Ohio. The Maymore Mound is one of the few Adena mounds to remain untouched through the years. Although some early farmers cut into the mound, it still withholds a lot of artifacts and information. The mound lies on the same property as the Maymore Mansion, which is another historical site. In today's time, the mound continues to be a local historic attraction that draws people from far and wide.
I'm standing here in the Lost Colony, just a couple miles in from the mouth of the Kanawha River, clear down to the Putnam County line. This is a land that the governor of Virginia, Robert Dinwiddie, proposed to give to the officials of his Virginia militia, such as George Washington, because of their efforts in the French and Indian War. Well, in 1771, George Washington took advantage of this opportunity from Governor Dinwiddie, and he sent a guy by the name of William Crawford to survey this land now known as the Lost Colony. By 1772, Washington placed his claim upon this land. It's a land of 10,990 acres. He set his eyes on giving parts of this land to some settlers in the area, but because Indians and settlers could not get along very well, settlers did not want to stop here and settle. By the time the Battle of Point Pleasant would break out in 1774 and the colonists were victorious, Washington began to think, well, maybe I can get some settlers to move on to my land. He sends a couple guys, James Cleveland and William Stevens, as well as some servants, to come and establish this land into the colony that he had in his mind. But they did not have it easy because there were runaway servants and a lack of supplies. However, they were successful, and by 1775, according to a tax appraiser, Washington's colony had become an establishment of 14 buildings. It also had peach trees and other just great successful endeavors. But George Washington found himself eventually in the Revolutionary War. And in 1775, another Indian settler conflict would break out. It would lead to the burning of Fort Blair, which is what preceded Fort Randolph. Washington's Lost Colony was a true ghost town because records since 1775 have nothing to show for it. It's kind of like it just didn't exist. And although people are not sure what happened, some say that perhaps it burned down just like Fort Blair did. But no matter what happened here, Washington's Lost Colony remains an irreplaceable treasure of Mason County history. Even one of our founding fathers, George Washington, saw the potential of Mason County's agriculture and community.
Hi, I did my video project on the Andrews and Charles Lewis March. Located near Charleston Road, just east of hometown West Virginia, which this is the road right here, as you can tell. It is one of the 4 different historical markers. This marker signifies the march of Andrew and Charles Lewis from Lewisburg to Point Pleasant with their army in Lord Dunsmore War. The march occurred on a nearby highway that was critical to reaching the nearby territory. Just north of this location occurred the Battle of Point Pleasant, a significant battle in October 1774. Part of West Virginia Department of Culture and History, this marker commemorates the march of Andrew and Charles Lewis during Lord Dunmore's War. Andrew Lewis was a prominent soldier during the Indian Wars of colonial era, as well as a famous officer in general in the American Revolution, and served with a remarkable work ethic during the French and Indian War.
The sign of the Battle of Point Pleasant in War of 1812. On October 10th, in the year of 1774, General Andrew Lewis and thousands of Virginia riflemen defeated the Indians that were led by Chief Cornstalk. This was known as the First Battle of the Revolution, and was also known as the most important war between the whites and Indians. This was the Battle of Point Pleasant. It happened at the Dewey Park in Point Pleasant in Mason County. This history brings a great amount of tourism to Mason County, and there is even a Battle Days festival. The dent that the Battle of Point Pleasant leaves is that many people believe that Chief Cornstalk cursed the area, causing the Mothman.
Hello, I'm standing here in Dewey State Park where the Kanawha River meets the Ohio River, and here on October 10th, 1774 is where the Indians fought the Virginia militia, in an attempt to halt Virginia's advance into the Ohio Valley. Behind me is the Twin Dewey Monument, and on it is a list of names of soldiers lost in the battle. Many think that it was the first battle of the Revolutionary War. The idea leaves our county to be remembered. If you have ever been here at the park before then, I am sure you have seen the beautiful murals painted along the flood wall to commemorate the battle. Generations after us will be able to come here to learn, visualize, and remember what happened in this historic place.
I'm currently standing at the Point Pleasant Battle, or also known as the Battle of Kanawha in Mason County, West Virginia. The events that had occurred on this very soil is referred to as the very first battle of the Revolutionary War. The battle broke out on the edge of the Ohio River between the Virginians, led by Andrew Lewis, and the Shawnees, led by Cornstalk. The conflict was sparked when the Shawnees took residence alongside the banks of Ohio River. On the night of October 9th to the end of October 10th of 1774, two armies began attacking the Shawnees, sent by the last colonial governor of Virginia, Lord Dunmore. Though the Virginians were successful, the impact of laying at rest loved ones was left the most damaging impact. Though the men who died in battle are honored through the historic landmark that is right behind me, fellow people today cannot help but question, could this have been avoided? This war could have easily been avoided if only Virginia was more welcoming.
Fort Randolph was a war fort built in 1776 and used during the American Revolution. The fort was first built at the point where the Ohio and Kanawha rivers meet in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. Fort Randolph was built by Virginia militiamen. The fort is named after Payton Randolph. He was the first president of the Continental Congress who had died the previous year. Fort Randolph was constructed to protect the Native Americans from raiding Western Virginia and Pennsylvania. The original plan to stop the raids failed, so the militiamen planned to venture into the Native American territory. Before the plan was carried out, Chief Cornstalk visited Fort Randolph. He wanted to stay away from war, but he was held captive. Today, Fort Randolph is remembered as the place where Chief Cornstalk died. Fort Randolph was abandoned in 1777, and after the abandonment, the Native Americans later burned down the fort. A replica of the fort was built in 1973. The town of Point Pleasant had taken over the original spot where the fort was, so the replica was constructed at Crowdell Park. Today, people still visit Fort Randolph and have yearly reenactments of the battle.
As seen on the sign, Fort Blair is a precursor to Fort Randolph. Fort Randolph was built during the Revolutionary War. It was built on the same site as a fort from Dunmore's War. It is remembered for being the place that the Shawnee Indian chief Cornstalk was killed, and he was killed in 1777. It was abandoned in 1779. In the 1780s, it was rebuilt for further use, but was then abandoned once again. About 2 centuries later, a replica of the fort was built at Crowdell Park. Anne Bailey, otherwise known as Mad Ann Bailey, was a storyteller and scout who served in the Revolutionary War. She was born in 1742 and died in November of 1825. She was known as the heroine of the Kanawha Valley. She was born in Liverpool, England, but came to Virginia at roughly the age of 19. She married a British soldier who was later killed by Shawnee Indians in Lord Dunmore's War. After that, she left her son with a neighbor and then joined the militia. In 1794, her second husband, John Bailey, was murdered in what was Point Pleasant, Virginia. Until her death, she continued to travel. Her remains now lay in what is known as Dewey Park.
The sign seen here represents the historic Fort Robinson that could be found north of Point Pleasant, West Virginia. Although no one is completely sure of where the fort stood, it is said to have been built just opposite the 6-mile island in the Ohio River along what is now West Virginia Route 62, again, just north of Point Pleasant. Around the area of where the sign stands, Fort Robinson was built by Captain Isaac Robinson in 1794. Robinson, having been born in Virginia in 1754, moved to Mason County, West Virginia after the Revolutionary War. Although the sign makes it seem he was taken by Indians as an adult, he was actually captured as a young boy in Virginia, and he had lived with the Native Americans for over 12 years. Soon after Robinson moved to Mason County and built the blockhouse, named Fort Robinson, Indians had attacked. Despite the Indians' efforts, the troops were able to defend what was theirs and had the natives running.
Lewis Capehart Roseberry House, 1 Roseberry Lane, Point Pleasant, West Virginia. Roseberry stands on expansive, tree-shaded grounds near the point where Old Town Creek flows into the Ohio River at Point Pleasant, West Virginia. The property of Roseberry dates from the 18th century land grant given to Colonel Andrew Lewis and his 4 brothers, among them Thomas W. Lewis Sr., upon whose portion of the grant the house called Roseberry now stands. He first appears in chronicles as having been a member of the Virginia militia, along with his brothers, that accompanied General Braddock's army on its disastrous expedition of 1755 under Colonel George Washington. It is even said that Colonel George Washington slept on the grounds of the Roseberry property. Thomas Lewis Sr. later served in the Virginia House of Burgesses as representative of Augusta County, as well as serving in the conventions that framed the Virginia Constitution and ratified the federal Constitution. In addition, Thomas Lewis Sr. was the owner of the first ferry to operate in what is now Mason County, and in 1794 was the primary mover in laying off lots and streets on his own land, an action that constituted the founding of the town of Point Pleasant. Upon the death of Thomas Lewis Sr. in 1813, his son, Thomas W. Lewis Jr., inherited a portion of his father's large land holdings, including the property of the Roseberry. Thomas Lewis Jr. lived in the house until 1868 and then sold it and the property to James Capehart. Capehart became the county court president in 1871. He then again achieved the position in 1880 and held it until 1885. Capehart sold the house to Richard Spence, a local farmer, after the close of his first term as county court presidency late in 1873. Spence retained the property only until 1880, when it was sold to W.A. Roseberry. Although the property remained in the Roseberry family until 1977, various members of the family held title to the property over the years. Andrew H. Roseberry, son of W.O. Roseberry, acquired the land from his parents in 1909. Later, a partial interest passed to Julia Lewis Roseberry Thomas and her husband, James K. Thomas. James K. Thomas is an individual of some note, having served as Attorney General of West Virginia from 1942 to 1945 and was a leading contender in the Democratic race for governor of West Virginia in 1948. In 1977, the Roseberry House was sold by W.O. Roseberry II and the Thomas family to Mr. Trenton M. Stover, Jr., who presently resides in the home. Mr. Stover and his wife are currently restoring the home to its original beauty. The Roseberry is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. The owners have also opened up the home to the public for tours to show its rich history and significance in Mason County.
The Mark Twain family sign, located along West Virginia Route 62, just 3 miles north of Leon, West Virginia, was once the home of Samuel and Pamela Clemens, the grandparents of Mark Twain, the American writer. Before moving to the southern bank of the Ohio River in Mason County, West Virginia, the Clemens family was slaveholding farmers in what was then Cabell County, Virginia. They bought the land in 1803. His grandfather, Samuel, was accidentally killed in a house raising in 1805. Mark Twain's father, their eldest son, John Marshall Clemens, lived there until he moved out west, where he and his wife Jane eventually became the parents of Samuel Langhorne Clemens, or better known as his pen name, Mark Twain. Today, the location is now home to the Clemens State Tree Nursery, named for the family of one of the greatest authors in American history.
The Powell Redmond House is a beautiful brick home located in Mason County, West Virginia, located in Clifton. This house overlooks the mighty Ohio River and offers privacy. As of 1983, this home resides the list of the United States National Registry of Historic Places. It was built in 1866 by General William Henry Powell, who was an American soldier during the Civil War. Powell and his family lived in the home that he built from 1866 to 1871. After Powell sold the nail factory he owned in 1871, the family moved to Kansas. This property was later purchased by Benjamin Redmond in 1885.
The house sits on 3 acres of land. This is an expansive 2.5 brick home that one can easily get lost in, with 14 rooms in all, including 4.5 baths. This house also has a library and a ballroom. Who wouldn't love that? This home holds its significance as one of the finest landmarks in this part of the county.
General John McCausland. John McCausland Sr. and his wife Harriet had a son in St. Louis, Missouri on September 13, 1836. The couple of Irish ancestry decided to name their child after his father, John McCausland. Only 7 years later, the child's parents both passed away. Living as orphans, John and his brother Robert moved to Virginia. It wasn't long before Mason County welcomed their presence, for the brothers had a relative here. By 1857, John held a degree in engineering from the Virginia Military Institute, or the VMI. He then began school at the University of Virginia, but soon decided to accept a teaching job at the VMI. John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry occurred in 1859, and John McCausland was there, representing the VMI. The unity of America was struggling and civil war looked inevitable. By 1860, South Carolina seceded from the United States. The following year, Fort Sumter in South Carolina was met by Confederate opposition, forcing Union soldiers to surrender. The Civil War was officially underway. The 36th Virginia Infantry became the responsibility of John McCausland, finding a great deal of troops from the future territory of West Virginia. As general, McCausland fought in multiple battles, including the battles of Fort Donelson and Charleston. In 1864, the Battle of Cloyd's Mountain led to a Union victory. The Brigadier General of the Confederates was Albert Jenkins. After he was killed during the Battle of Cloyd's Mountain, John McCausland became a Brigadier General in the Confederate military. McCausland was most revered for his involvement in the Virginia community of Lynchburg and Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. On July the 30th, 1864, General McCausland followed orders to destroy Chambersburg by fire. As a result of this occurrence, McCausland was considered a criminal of arson for years to come. The town of Chambersburg suffered severe loss from McCausland's act. As the Confederates' chances of victory dwindled, General Robert E. Lee of the Confederates and General USS Grant of the Union met at the McLean House in Appomattox, Virginia on April the 9th, 1865. The Civil War had fallen into Union hands. Though president at Appomattox, McCausland was unwilling to follow General Lee's decision of surrender. Before Lee surrendered, General McCausland was gone. Following the Civil War, McCausland feared punishment from the United States. Therefore, in an effort to elude possible punishment, McCausland journeyed abroad, such as Europe and Mexico. Eventually, McCausland again made his home in the United States. President Grant, the former general of the Union Army, pardoned McCausland's crime at Chambersburg. Mason County once again became McCausland's home in 1867. In 1878, the marriage of John McCausland and Emmett Charlotte Hannah took place. The couple eventually had 4 kids. In 1885, McCausland had his home erected near the Mason-Putnam border in West Virginia. Built with 18-inch wide blocks of sandstone, McCausland's home stands a sturdy building, featuring a multitude of fireplaces, multiple rooms, an elevator, dumbwaiter, and exposed electrical wires. Referring to the presence of grapes nearby, McCausland sometimes referred to his residence as Grape Hill. McCausland's home is currently being restored. I spoke with the lead contractor, and he says the McCausland's great-grandson privately owns the home. Therefore, I couldn't take any pictures showing much detail of the house. He informed me, however, of the cabin across the street where General McCausland lived during the home's construction. You can see the cabin in the background. It is now a barn. Somewhere in this proximity of Mason County, McCausland owned a farm known as the Sabrell McCausland Farm. John Sabrell's nephew handed the farm down to his wife in 1870. Over the course of years, 1890 to 1892, General McCausland bought the Sabrell's farm. He was, indeed, the neighbor of the Sabrells at the time. The Sabrell-McCausland farm exists in 3 sections, and the general applied the tactic of farm tiling. In fact, McCausland's farms, Smithland, Grape Hill, and Maplewood, all feature the first use of tiling in West Virginia. This method of agricultural draining was masterfully applied by the engineer. General McCausland had 3 sons, Samuel, Alexander, and John McCausland Jr. Being that the general had 3 farms, each of his sons inherited a farm. The Sabrell McCausland farm was handed to Samuel. He and his wife Amanda operated it. Considering the large amount of maple trees on the Sabrell McCausland farm, it was named Maplewood. Today, the McCauslands continue to use this land. In the Henderson area, the General John McCausland Memorial Farm, or the Smithland Farm, stands. The farm was given to McCausland by a will from James W. Smith, his first cousin. By 1892, McCausland owned and operated this farm. As previously mentioned, the Smithland Farm was known for the masterful use of tiling. Today, the Smithland Farm is overseen by the McCausland family as well as the West Virginia Department of Agriculture. General McCausland died on January the 22nd, 1927 at Grape Hill, and his body was transported by barge to Henderson due to flooding. McCausland died without repenting of his resistance to the Union. In a way, he died a Confederate soldier. General John McCausland was a prominent man of his day. Here in Mason County, McCausland was a leading farmer and a wealthy landowner, but despite his farming success, General McCausland is most remembered for just that, being a general during the American Civil War. Now for a few interesting facts about General McCausland. When taking into consideration every Confederate general of the Civil War, McCausland outlived all but one. McCausland was sometimes called Tiger John. When General McCausland's body was taken to Henderson on the boat, a Confederate flag was placed upon his coffin. General McCausland, in reference to his actions at Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, is quoted for saying the following to Garnett Askew: "God, how they hate me, those Pennsylvania people. Well, young man, my memory is very clear, my conscience is clear, and I have no apology to make. I held a commission in the Confederate Army." Today, General McCausland leaves a legacy not only in Mason County, but throughout America.
Doing my video project for Joy Lewis. He was born on July 6, 1848 in here in West Virginia. His father died when he was young, so he was forced to have a different childhood. He grew up without his mother in his life, and like I said, his father passed away, so he was forced to raise his siblings by himself. And he had to work a lot of different jobs growing up so he could provide for his siblings. His first major job he had when he got older was being a teacher. But then he grew out of loving that and began practicing as a lawyer in 1879. And that lasted for about 10 years before he decided to go back and be a teacher. So what did he actually do? Like I said, he was a teacher and then a lawyer for 10 years. He was a teacher, principal, and superintendent here in Mason County. While he was superintendent, he founded the West Virginia Historical Magazine in 1892. And then in 1896, he was the president of the Community College here at Mason City. And then lastly, in 1905, he was the first state archivist and the first state historian here in West Virginia. Like I said, pretty much here in our part of Mason County, Point Pleasant, and so on, is where he left his greatest impact. Earlier in his teaching years, he also taught in Putnam County, but not as well as he did here in our county. He is buried in the Hill Road in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, and his funeral is actually held at the Mason Methodist Church. And like I said, his life was pretty much spent loving history throughout the whole state of West Virginia, mainly our part here. His main significance, like I said, from a young age, he had a great love for history, and he did all he could for the subject. He taught kids, he taught his siblings, pretty much all he could do. He picked Mason County as his main spot because this is where he was born. This is where he spent most of his time. And he will be remembered as one of the greatest historians.
Although Hartford is a stagnant economy, it was once a booming economy because of the salt industry. The salt industry was it for over a century here in Hartford, and it all started in 1856. When 2 Eastern capitalists had investments here, Morgan Buckley and William Haley from Hartford, Connecticut, which is how the town got its name, came here to start the salt mine business. So, whenever they did the salt furnaces with the salt companies, it required coal. A byproduct of obtaining the salt was bromine. So by 1877, just 21 years after the salt mine business started, there were already over 15 salt, coal, and bromine-related companies in Mason County alone, and two of the largest were the Hartford City Coal and Salt Company and the Liverpool Salt Company. And the Hartford City Coal and Salt Company rested at the bottom of Sling Hill Creek, and because the rivers were narrower, the company and its salt mines rested lower below Sling Hill Creek than you would think. And because it rested along the river, the three biggest floods the area ever saw in 1884, 1913, and 1937 caused major damage to the company. In 1884, the flood itself caused $100,000 in damage, which in 2018 money is $2.43 million. The company also had a sawmill and salt furnace ruined, and the coal mine was ruined for 4 months before it could be used again. As for Liverpool, which sits along currently Route 62, it only lost an entire barge worth of salt. So, to obtain the salt, companies have wells over 1,000 feet in the ground, and they pump this water out into vats, where they evaporate the water to obtain the salt. The salt would then be placed into a barrel and shipped by river to the west. So, along with the coal mines, the salt mines make up the entire economy of Hartford, which explains why the economy rests to what it is today. And the companies began to close down because the owners, as they got older, began to sell them off to new owners before they died. And the new owners found better ways to mine the salt than what we did, and therefore decided to close the doors on the salt companies, with the last salt company, Liverpool, closing its doors in 1963, officially ending the salt era in Hartford and Mason County.
Alright, I'm Anthony Ortiz, and I'm currently standing outside of one of two of the Gold Brothers houses in Mason, West Virginia. This is the last standing one out of the two brothers, the Gold Brothers. They built these two houses in 1908, and this is the last one standing. And the other one was burnt in a house fire back in 2004 by previous owners, and it was actually down that way, and this is the last one standing. So this is one of the last Queen Anne style houses in the tri-state area, Benton area. And both houses were added to the National Register of Historical Places in 1997, and it's currently owned by Zach Roush, and I want to thank him for letting me film here.
Established in 1919 and opening in 1926, Layne Hospital was a groundbreaking facility in that it provided care for Black citizens and was operated by a Black administration and staff. Layne Hospital was one of the only 2 hospitals in the country to have an all-African American staff. Layne was one of several institutions in West Virginia whose creation can be attributed to the efforts of African American legislators T.G. Nutter, Harry Capehart, and T.J. Coleman. These men helped establish institutions which provided services to the state's African American community. Psychiatric treatment in the United States from 1948 into the 1950s often resorted to lobotomies as treatment. Dr. Walter Freeman, developer of the transorbital lobotomy, performed many such procedures at the facility. Layne Hospital is located within easy driving distance of several metropolitan areas in West Virginia, such as Charleston, Parkersburg, Huntington, and Ripley. The facility began making the transition from psychiatric to nursing care in the late 1970s, achieving its intermediate care facility status in 1984, which means it could provide nursing care to adults of all races. It is now a 114-bed facility operated by the West Virginia Department of Health and Human Resources. Though some pieces of the old hospital remain, the majority of it was later torn down, and the Layne Nursing Home now stands on the site.
My video is about the Lowe Hotel. In 1901, it was opened by 2 brothers named Homer and Griff Smith. It was originally opened under the name the Spencer Hotel because of the lawyer that had helped finance it. They owned it until 1929, when Homer D. Lowe bought it. When the Smith boys owned it, it served as a rest place for the men of the heavy river traffic. But when Lowe bought it, during the market crash, he changed the name and the dynamic of the hotel. In 1990, it was purchased by Mary and Rush Finley, and they still own it today. The hotel resides on 401 Main Street, Point Pleasant, West Virginia. The Lowe Hotel is most well known for being haunted by several ghosts, such as a disheveled dancing woman who dances alone by herself, a toddler on a tricycle, a string quartet, and a legless boat captain. The hotel keeps its historic touch because it still has much of the original furniture, and every room is decorated differently. What started as a place for weary rivermen turned into a historic hotel for people to enjoy.
This is the State Theater, located in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. It was opened in 1942 and is the only theater home to Mason County ever. The State Theater was a single-room auditorium that housed 700 seats. There was no balcony in the auditorium, as they did not have that kind of architecture when it was first built in 1942. Originally opening in 1942, the State Theater remained open until 1980. For 13 years, the building sat vacant, and then after a year of restoration, the State Theater opened in 1994. It remained open until 2003. For the next 5 years, the building was only used for live performances. The State Theater is located on Main Street in Point Pleasant. Main Street is also the home of many businesses and restaurants. Because of this location, it was a very popular spot back in its prime days. The State Theater is very important to Mason County's history. It was the first theater ever to be brought into the county, as well as the last. Since the State Theater, there has never been the establishment of another theater. Since the closure of the State Theater in 2008, it has been variously used for many showings to deal with the Mothman. It was recently put up for sale. If the State Theater were to sell, this county would lose some of its significance in history dating back to the 1940s.
This building, known as the State Theater, was originally used as a movie theater. It was built in 1935 and it is Art Deco style, but it is now for sale. We've arrived at our next destination. The Lowe Hotel was built in 1910. Its original name was the Spencer Hotel, and it is the largest brick structure in Point Pleasant. The buildings that you saw on the way here are also part of the historic district, and they all have a similar style. They are Renaissance Revival, a lot of them, and they are also Romanesque Revival. They were all built during the same time period. This is the city post office. It was built in 1913 and many alterations have been made to it. It was originally built by the Harmon brothers and they built it in a classical style, as you can see. This building is the Church of Christ in Christian Union. It was originally a Methodist church. It was built in 1840 by men of the congregation, and in 1864 it was used as a hospital during the Civil War. Now Main Street leads into Dewey, And as you can see down there, past the flood wall, is Towindle.
On 4th Street in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, there is a 12-foot statue by Bob Roach created in 2002. It is of the Mothman who terrorized residents of Point Pleasant from November 1966 to December 1967. It all began November 12, 1966, when men digging a grave claimed to see a man-like figure flying around. The next report was November 15, 1966, when two couples in the TNT area saw a creature with glowing red eyes. After this, the sightings continued. National news picked up the story, and suddenly everyone knew about Point Pleasant, West Virginia. The sightings ended after the Silver Bridge collapse, which some say was caused by the Mothman. The Mothman is arguably the most memorable figure in Point Pleasant history. In 2002, there was even a festival created after him called the Mothman, where people from all over the country come. There is even a Mothman museum. While the Mothman is celebrated in present times, it is important to remember the dark history that started it all.
The Silver Bridge was an I-bar chain suspension bridge built in 1928, and it was named for the color of its aluminum paint. The bridge carried U.S. Route 35 over the Ohio River, connecting Point Pleasant, West Virginia, and Gallipolis, Ohio. On December 15, 1967, the Silver Bridge collapsed while it was full of rush hour traffic, resulting in 46 deaths. 2 of the victims were never found. Investigation of the wreckage pointed to the cause of the collapse being the failure of an I-bar in the suspension chain due to a small defect 1 inch deep. Analysis showed that the Silver Bridge was carrying heavier loads than it originally been designed for, and it had been poorly maintained.
1976, Walden Roush founded the West Virginia State Farm Museum that is still here today. Walden Roush admired early farm life, and he once said, "I was afraid the farm heritage of West Virginia would be lost as modern methods and equipment advanced, as the old farm implements molded and rusted away in barn lofts and attics." Because of his love for West Virginia and early farm life, Walden Roush created the Farm Museum, which is a place filled with historical buildings and artifacts that have been moved and rebuilt as displays. Today, the executive committee keeps everything in order. These people include President Tim Kidwell, Vice President Larry Jones, CPA and Treasurer Dennis Brumfield, Secretary Donna Akers, John Olinger, Lori Starnaker, Donna Weaver, and Manager Lloyd Akers. Some attractions at the West Virginia State Farm Museum are the blacksmith shop, the schoolhouse, the doctor's office, the newspaper office, log cabins, the nature trail, the general, and more. The West Virginia State Farm Museum is always open to visitors, and it is located at 1458 Fairground Road, Point Pleasant, West Virginia, 25550. It is a great place to bring your whole family and learn some new facts about early farm life. The West Virginia State Farm Museum gives us a visual display of how activities were done all the way back to the 19th century.